Today's shiur begins 10 lines from the top. Bear in mind that we're continuing with information, with a discussion that we have already started in our previous shiur, and the general issue has to do with how much does a husband write into the ksuba with regard to cash and vessels that a wife brings into the marriage. We saw that if a woman brings into the marriage cash, so the husband will write into the ksuba the amount that she brought in, plus what the Mishnah calls as a tosefes shlish, an addition of a third. That's a third from the outside, meaning if she brought in $1,000, he'll write into the ksuba that she brought in $1,500. The difference of $500 being a third of $1,500, just as an example. If she brings in vessels and they are evaluated by her family, so we saw that they tend to inflate the value, and the actual value would be a fifth, 20% less than that which they said it is worth, and hence he writes in to the ksuba that he received, or there was brought into their marriage, a vessel worth that amount, 20% less than that which they had evaluated. That's by way of general background to review the main points that are relevant to this piece of Gemara. On the side of the Gemara, we have a nosei mivneh heading. You'll notice that we have a firebox featured, a rather rare marking in Gemara markings, but it highlights a name that will occupy us for quite a long time. In this case, Rabbi Yochanan will be the center of our discussion, and we've written on the side, Shitas Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan holds the Isha HaMachnisa Chatichei Zahav, a woman who brings into the marriage pieces of gold. Roishmim Oisoi B'Ksuva B'Shavyo. It's recorded in the ksuba at its actual value. No addition of a third, no reduction of a fifth. He'ora. We want to point something out. B'malcha Gemara yeshnei diyunim mishulavim echad b'seich hasheni. We want to make it clear that as we go on in the Gemara, there are going to be two discussions, one within the other. So when we used to play baseball, they used to tell us, keep your eye on the ball. And in this case, you have a sugya. There are two things happening at once, so you have to be able to focus. And that's why with the markings we're going to attempt to enable that to take place, focusing on the one hand on Rabbi Yochanan, and then the internal additional discussion that takes place. We turn now to the Gemara text. Omar Rav Shamon bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan. Hichnisa loy zohav shamin oisoi v'harei hu kishavyo. A woman comes into a marriage bringing with her pieces of gold. It's recorded, it's assessed and recorded at its value. Shamin means assessment. It's a reference here to the assessment and the amount recorded in the ksuba, kishavyo, at its actual value. Meaning no addition of a third, as would be in the case of raw cash, nor a reduction of 20%, as would be the case with non-cash items. We'll say vessels. By way of markings, we see a triangle, and on the side of the Gemara, we explain the triangle represents Kushos al Rabbi Yochanan. So you see one triangle over here. There will be then another triangle 2 lines later. The inverted triangle that will appear later we'll see the first of these on the second wide line of the Gemara. Teguvos, reactions, uchuvos, lekushos hanal. They are reactions to these particular questions. So after hearing Rabbi Yochanan say that you record pieces of gold at their market value, meisvei, Hazov Harei Hu Kikelim. Zahav, gold. Rashi explains pieces of gold, broken gold, is considered like vessels. Of course, within our context, my love, Kikelim shel kesef de pachti. The pieces of gold are viewed as we would view silver vessels that are subject to pachti, from the word pachot, is depreciation. And being that it's subject to depreciation, one would record as its value 20% less than what it is assessed at. One says, no, that's not the understanding of this source. And if you would have left it at Kekelim Kekesef, that would have been a problem for Rabbi Yochanan. So the Gemara says, no, it's not a problem. Rather, Kekelim Shel Zahav Delo Pachti. I erroneously overlooked this particular inverted triangle before in our introduction. Here again, here's an early inverted triangle as a response in defense of Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara asks, well, im kain, if the source is read as Hazov Harehu Kekelim, and Kelim means Kelim of Zahav, means golden vessels. Golden vessels do not depreciate. So there's no reason to record any less value than its assessed market value. So they don't depreciate. And then we would have a support for Rabbi Yochanan from this source. The Gemara asks, if that's how you want to read the source, im kain kekelov mi boyalei. Grammatically, it would be more accurate to simply say hazov, pieces of gold, harei hu kekelov, are like its, using the pronoun its vessels, meaning gold. You mentioned gold at the beginning, so it would be more accurate to say the vessels made of it, of gold. Now it doesn't say that. Now notice we have a very long question, and in actuality, technically you could skip this angular bracketed section. Look how far down it goes. Try to use your bracket length indicator. You see on the left-hand side of the Gemara text a vertical dotted line. This vertical dotted line corresponds to the angular brackets. So if you follow it all the way down, you see you get to the second wide line. What happens is that there's an entire internal discussion, but after the smoke clears, mikol makoim kelov mi boyalei. This question remains by the time you get down to that section of the Gemara. And in response to that, the Gemara throws up its hands and says, Kashya, this is a problem. It's a technical difficulty on Rabbi Yochanan. There's another two approaches to help resolve the source with Rabbi Yochanan leaving Rabbi Yochanan looking okay. So, Mirz Hashem, when we get to that, we'll try to point that out again. But you notice that by way of the markings, we were able to make things, we're able to focus on the main point of the Gemara without getting sidetracked. And now, having said that, we have more work to do. We have, of course, the entire bracketed section, and also there's an element of complexity to this internal bracketed section as well. I included a little note on the side, the double-starred note, which says what we just said, but we can read it anyway. The little double-starred note opposite this very long question, Yesh lo sim lev, you should pay attention, note, al yedei shimush b'sograyim, by the use of the brackets, Iker hakushya al Rabbi Yochanan toifes ma'at shurel shel Gemara. The main question of Rabbi Yochanan really takes up very little of the Gemara text. And now we go back into the Gemara. we continue where the angular bracket appears, V'od Tanya. And furthermore, we have another difficulty, what appears to be a difficulty, and I'll tell you ahead of time, what appears to be a difficulty, this number 2, this second point of difficulty, will be through the form of a Tanaic source. However, the difficulty that this presents will be answered within the bracketed section. You'll see a number of lines later, some diamonds, but diamonds with numbers. Number 1, there's a little diamond, the diamond, it says Li'olam, and a few lines after that it says Iboyas Ema. These numbered diamonds will be responses to the difficulty posed by the Tanaic source that we have to read. Before we even get to the Tanaic source, we're going to note ahead of time that as the Gemara goes on, we read the Od Tanya, you run into a curlicue brace. That indicates, for our purposes, as our note on the side, it states that you ought to skip this section initially because the text within the source is not smooth. It needs to be clarified. And the clarification of the source appears right after these brackets. So if you initially learn the Gemara this way, let's do it together. The Od Tanya. Now skip the bracketed section. Use your bracket length indicator. You can see the vertical dash dotted line to the immediate right hand side of the Gemara. And we read a source after the brackets. It says, Zov Harehu Kekalim. Gold is treated like vessels, with regard, of course, to the topic of what you record in the Ksuba. My Kalim, like what kind of vessels? Kalim Shel Kesef. Well, this is not good for Rabbi Yochanan. Here you have broken pieces of gold are treated like silver vessels. And how do we treat silver vessels? When recording their value in the Ksuba, we write in a figure 20% less than that which they had evaluated it. That's not like Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said regarding Zov, you write in its actual value, Kishavyo. So as we say, that is the Resha. That's the first part of this source, and that presents a problem for Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara, however, as we said before, will answer that problem. That will take place when we get to that in our discussion. But for our purposes, the original question will remain. That we'll call it the grammatical type question from the point raised above, where the second triangle with the point facing up had appeared. Kelov mi boyale. Okay, now that we got a little taste of the, we'll say, the structural complexity, let's go back over the Gemara from the O Tanya, where the angular brackets began. The O Tanya. Zahav harehu kekalim. Gold is treated like vessels. Dinare zav, those are gold coins. That comes into the realm of cash. Harei hein kiksofim, gold dinarim. Dinar is a denomination of coin. It is like ksofim, and ksofim means like cash. You would add a third. So if she brings in 10 dinar zav, you would write in 15. That the husband obligates himself to 15 dinar zav in the ksuba. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel oimer b'mokim shenohagu shelo leforton shamin oison v'harei hein b'shavyehen. In communities where people do not give you change, in other words, the dinar zahav is a coin that represents a significant amount of money, and people would like to change it, to cash it for smaller denominations. So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that in places where they do not change your money, for smaller denominations, then you don't treat it as raw cash, but harehen b'shavyehen, you would write in their actual value. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel ahei. The comment made by Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, what is he a reaction to? In lema aseifa, if you're going to think it is like we said, like we presented the source, meaning that he is a comment on the seifa, on the dinarei zahav. So what is Reb Shimon ben Gamliel saying? That dinarei zahav you would record at their market, at their actual value. Where does that leave the Tanakama then regarding the dinarei zahav? Michlal, the Tanakama sovar, afilu b'mokim shenagu shelo leforton. Is the Tanakama then saying that the dinarei zahav, even in a place where they do not offer you change, you will add a third as if it's regular cash? Holo nafki. But they can't be spent. The Tanakama would make no sense if we say that Reb Shimon ben Gamliel is referring to the dinarei zahav that the Tanakama was referring to, because if that's the case, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel is saying you would record them, since it's a mokum shenagu shelo lefortin, record them at their market value. That would leave the Tanakama telling you that you would treat it as ksafim, which he says black on white. You would treat the dinarei zahav as ksafim. You would add a third, but it's in a place where people don't. It's not spendable. People can't invest in it. The whole logic that we gave in the past for the increase of a third is that it represents a source of quick profiting for the husband. But it's holo nafki. People don't accept it in commerce. Elolav aresha. So rather, we have to say that Reb Shimon Gamliel's comment is going on the resha. V'hachi ka'omar. And now we'll be rereading the source, and as we reread the source, we're going to run into the problem that we alluded to before. There is a problem in the rereading on Rabbi Yochanan, but ironically, if you will, the problem comes from the Tanakama. It's not coming from Reb Shimon Gamliel. It's just that the way we, in order to understand the source, we have to understand Reb Shimon Gamliel as well. That's what I mentioned earlier, that there are really two things going on at once. We're asking questions on Reb Yochanan, and we're at the same time trying to make sense of the source, and particularly what is Reb Shimon Gamliel saying. The diamonds that we've started seeing are explained on the side. There are 4 nisyonos of tshuvas levara she'ela Reb Shimon Gamliel ahei. What is Reb Shimon Gamliel going on? So we already said that if you want to have him going on the seifa point bays, the second point of the Tanakama on the dinarei zahav, that would leave the Tanakama saying something that makes no sense. Therefore, we're at the second diamond, elolav aresha v'hachi ka'omar. The problem, or I should say the understanding of Shimon Gamliel is he is a commentary on the resha. And how does the source read? Zahav harehu kekelim. Broken pieces of gold are treated like vessels. My kelim? Kelim shel kesef. They're treated like silver vessels. And that means, and we wrote in between the lines, you'll yafchis chomesh. You're going to treat the broken pieces of gold like silver vessels that are brought into a marriage, and that means a 20% reduction of what they had assessed it at. And that's not like Reb Yochanan, because Reb Yochanan said regarding Zav, it's kishavyo. So this is what was meant by the Gemara at the beginning of the angular brackets, when it said the old Tanyan, we have another problem on Reb Yochanan, and this is the problem. And this, by the way, our commentary is based on Tosfos, a very short Tosfos. It says, Elo Aresha mida Rabbanan porach. We're asking from the Rabbanan on Reb Yochanan. But that having been said, we have to deal with the Tanaic source on its own merit as well, putting the Reb Yochanan problem aside for the time being. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel loimer, harei hu kedinrim shel zahav. Now, maybe I should point out the reason that we start this there's this curlicue brackets here, is because we wanted to isolate the section that's a problem for Rabbi Yochanan. And here we go on with dealing with the source as well. So Reb Shimon Gamliel Oimer Harei Hu, the pieces of gold, Kedinrim Shel Zahav, they're treated like gold dinar coins, B'mokim Shenoagu Shelo Leforton, as people would view them in communities where they don't offer you change for it, and that means that's B'shavyo. So the Tanakama said pieces of gold are treated like vessels of silver, and Reb Shimon Gamliel is referring to that point that the Tanakama had made regarding the pieces of gold. He's not dealing with the dinarei zahav. He's dealing with the pieces of gold are like dinarei zahav in a place where people don't offer you change for them, and that means kishavyo. So you have a machlokes. Tanakama says pieces of gold brought into a marriage are recorded with a 20% reduction of their assessment, and Reb Shimon Gamliel is telling you pieces of gold brought into the marriage are recorded as they are assessed. Now, but if we stop here, then we have to repeat what we mentioned before. We have a problem on Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara says, Loi, Le'olam Aseifa. As far as Reb Shimon ben Gamliel is concerned, he in fact is a commentary on the Seifa. The Seifa dealt with the dinarei zahav. The Tanakama had discussed the dinarei zahav, and he said you add a third, and Reb Shimon Gamliel is then saying not so. Udenafki al yedei hadchak. In truth, the coins are expendable. They're spendable, I should say. They're spendable, but with difficulty. Not like we thought before when we were viewing the issue of the dinarei zahav as a place where no one accepts them in commerce. People do accept them in commerce, but begrudgingly. Ubahal komifliki, and the machlokes between the Tanakama and Reb Shimon Gamliel regarding the dinarei zahav is more sovar. The Tanakama says add a third. Kevon de nafki, since you can spend them, mishabchinon law, we add the third. Mishabchinon means we increase, we add a third in the ksuba. More sovar, Shmuel says, Kevon de lo nafki elo ayedei hadchak, lo mishabchinon law. Since they're spendable but only with great difficulty, so we don't add a third, we record their value as they are actually assessed. With this understanding of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel as a commentary on the Seifa of the Tanakama, on the dinarei zahav, we're not forced to understand the Tanakama anymore as describing the zahav, the pieces of silver, to be treated like kelim shel kesef, which meant a reduction. The reason we thought before that that's how we had to go, because otherwise Reb Shimon ben Gamliel would have made no sense. If he would have been a commentary on the Seif of the Tanakama, then, as we said before, the Tanakama would have been adding a third for dinarei zahav that aren't expendable at all, and we couldn't leave it at that. So, with this in mind, nafki al yedei hadchak, we're not forced to have Reb Shimon ben Gamliel as a commentary on the Reisha, and hence the comment of Zahav Arehu Kikelim, we can say Kikelim of Zahav, and where there's no depreciation, and then things would be okay for Rabbi Yochanan. Of course, the original question of the grammar remains, and that the Gemara will point out at the end of this section. Another approach to the Tanaic source with the Tanakama and Shimon Gamliel, Kula Reb Shimon Gamliel he, the Chisrei Mechasra v'Hachi Katani. The whole source is in accordance with Shimon Gamliel, And it's not as if there's Rav Shmuel is reacting to a Tanakama, but rather it's straightforward of Shmuel, and it reads as follows: Zahav harehu kikelim, dinarei zahav harei hein kiksofim. Pieces of gold are like vessels. Gold dinar coins are like cash, and that means you would add a third to the amount that is brought into the marriage of dinarei zahav. When do we say this, that you would add a third? That's in a place where the dinarei zahav are easily exchanged for smaller denominations. However, in communities where they do not exchange the gold coins for smaller denominations, the gold coins that are brought into the marriage will be recorded at their actual value. Divrei Reb Shimon Gamliel. That's the opinion of Reb Shimon Gamliel. Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer, in communities where the practice is not to exchange them for smaller denominations, the coins are recorded at their assessed value without any addition and without any reduction. Mikol mokoim kikelov miboyale. The original question from the regarding the source that read Hazav harehu kikelim, in order to preserve Rabbi Yochanan, in light of that, you have to say that Zav is like gold vessels that don't depreciate, and therefore you would record them in the Kesuba at their actual assessed value. Now that is a problem for Rabbi Yochanan, because grammatically it should have said Hazav harehu kekelov. Kashya. So regarding this, if you want the source to read that pieces of gold are treated like golden vessels and something that doesn't depreciate, and you would record its actual value, it should have read kikelov, like its vessels, not in the using the general term kikelim. Iboyasema. Another approach is that the pieces of gold are viewed as kesef, as vessels of kesef. Vessels of kesef meaning as silver vessels that depreciate. Hacha b'mayaskinon bedavo pricha. Here, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with gold filings. Pricha means small pieces. In the Mishnah is talking about small, very fine filings, and therefore in the Tanaic source, when you're transferring small filings, if let's say you want to hand fine gold filings to someone, some fall away. They can be blown away even in a breeze, and therefore there is depreciation, because there's environmental depreciation and environmental causes of depreciation, the wind blowing. Therefore, when the Tanaic source says Zahav Harei Hu Kikelim, it means that Zahav is like Kalim of silver, and there you would record a depreciation. What about Rabbi Yochanan? Rabbi Yochanan is talking about large pieces that don't get blown away in the wind, and hence you don't record any depreciation. Record their market value, their actual value. Rav Ashi Omar b'mamlo. Here Rashi says b'mamlo dak shel zahav shikorin. There's a French word that reminds us of the English word filings. Tosfos says mamlo zav anita min ha'oretz mimotzo. According to Tosfos, mamlo would appear to be gold that is gold. We'll call it gold ore, from where it's motzo, where it's found. It's where you mine the gold, and that is of less significance than pieces of refined gold. So that if you're dealing with mamlo, however, with either pshat you choose, that is what the Tanaic source is referring to when you would record the gold as kalim of silver, where you write in depreciation. Rabbi Yochanan was not talking about that type or that quality of gold. As we go on in the Gemara, we see under our Mivneh, our structural note, a double underline, one of our series markings, and we have written on the side, Chafotzim, we'll see articles, Shehem Mischarim, that are highly commercial, means people will barter using these items as if it's cash. They'll take these kind of vessels into any kind of store and get whatever they want using articles as opposed to cash. Therefore, if a woman would bring in any of the items mentioned in this list of double underlined things, if she brings them into marriage, they would be recorded with a third increase. If a woman brings them into marriage. So now let's see, what are these things? The spices or fragrances of Antuchya, Harei Hein Kiksofim. They're like cash. In a country known as Antuchya, that area called Antuchya, people actually do business using the besomim as their means of payment. Therefore, a husband that receives from his wife upon entrance to marriage besomim, he'll record them at not their actual value, but he'll record them with the third increase. Omar Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani, Omar Rabbi Yochanan, Gemolim Shel Aravia, camels of Arabia, Isha Goiva Parna Mehem. The word parna we're going to see a couple of times in the next few lines. At this point, parna means revach shlish, as Rashi says. That means that she will benefit by having the camels she brings into the marriage recorded at a third more than their actual value. Omar Rav Popi. Of course, it goes without saying that in Arabia, people would do business using camels as their means of payment. Omar Rav Popi, Hani Tosve de Beimersi. Tosve are dresses, smolos of Beimersi, it's the name of a place. Isha Goiva Parna Mehem. The same thing. The Omar Rav Popi, Hani Saki de Rudia, the Ashli de Kamchunya. Saki are sacks of Rudia. Rashi doesn't comment regarding this, so let's assume it's the name of a place. And Ashli de Kamchunya, Ashli are ropes of, again, Kamchunya will assume that's the name of a place. Isha Goiva Parna Mehem. These articles in their respective locations are as good as cash. Omar Rava, Meiresh Hava Amina. At first I used to think, now this section of Gemara is not very long, but it's almost a topic unto itself. There's a topic heading we have on the side. There's a Havamina presented in the Gemara by Rava that Ligvias Ksuba mi metaltalin, that a woman, when she becomes a widow and she wants to collect her ksuba, she would collect it from vessels, from portables. Now, I have to, just by way of background, in general, when you have a creditor, a Baal Chov, and in this case the Isha is like that, she's coming to collect a debt. When people lay out money in a standard loan situation, they lay out the money to a borrower. Of course, they're hoping to get their money back, and standard procedure is that if a person doesn't pay them back with cash, the person extends the loan because he feels, or he knows that the borrower has land. He relies on the land as a means of compensation in the absence of a cash payback. That's called shibudim. Person it's a type of, we can call it a lien on properties. What kind of properties? On real estate, because real estate is not here today and gone tomorrow, as opposed to portables. People, when they are owed money, when they loan money, they don't have any expectation to collect portables. If, of course, the borrower is alive, and he doesn't pay you cash, and he doesn't have any land, but he has portables, you can seize the portables. You can take the shirt off his back if it's an issue of collecting your loan. However, the nafkamina comes up when you're not collecting directly from the borrower, because, let us say, he died, but you're collecting from his heirs, from the yesomim. And there's a principle that metaltali yatsmi lo mishtabdi. The portables inherited by heirs are not subject to the payment of their father's loans. The properties, the real estate that the father left is subject to the payback of their father's loans. Heirs that inherited property will have to part with their real estate in payment of their father's debts. However, not so with regard to portables. So here we have something unique. We have an almona. She is like a Baal Chov. She's collecting her ksuba debt, and there's a havamina here that the almona will collect from metaltalin of Yisayimim mishum desamchi olayah, because people rely on these articles in these places. Just like we said before, that people, when they extend the loan, they realize, or they feel that the payback, if it's not from cash, it'll be paid back through real estate. It's not something that's temporal, that's passing in nature. However, in these places, Rav is about to say, I thought initially that people treat specific kinds of portables as if they're like land, because people rely on collecting their loans from these kind of portables. And our note says, and we won't say that this is a case of orphan inherited portables that are not subject to a lien. This, of course, will be changed. Rava will change his mind, because, as you can see, the language of the Gemara is Omar Rava, Meireish, means that at first I thought, Meireish Havamina, Hani Arniki de Mechuza. Arniki are pouches, wallets, vessels that are used as containers of different kinds of things, of cash and what have you. So, Hani Arniki de Mechuza, Isha Goiva Parna Mehem. And here, Goiva Parna, Rashi points out, it means, like we explained in our introduction, that a woman would be able to collect her ksuba from these Arniki of Mechuzah, and we don't apply the rule of Metaltal Yasmil Mishtabli, that portables of Yisomim, of orphans, are not bound. My taima, why does Rava have this feeling that a woman could, an almona could collect from the Yisayimim the Arniki de Mechuzah? Asmachtayu alayhu. Because people rely on them. Rashi says, Asmachtayu alayhu, v'gavyin metatali kihani shehein lehem b'mokim karkois, lefi shebali schurahim. It's an area of people engaged in constant commerce. And as such, there's constant trade, and they use these wallets as their means of payment. So it's viewed like it's viewed in the minds of people as something that they rely on, and that principle of relying on is what characterizes real estate. As we explained before, people rely on that as a means of collection. However, when I noticed that the women take these wallets, and these women who collect their Kesubos from through these wallets as their payment, and when these women who collected the wallets, when they find land, zavni bahu, they take the wallets and immediately buy land. Amina, I figured asmachtayu arahu, that the woman's real reliance is on land, and as a result of that, now with my new realization, if a woman comes to collect Arniki de Mechuzah from Yisayimim, I will not let the woman collect that, because they're metaltalin, and the rule will apply, as we said before, metaltali yasmi lo mishtabi. The portables of Yisayimim are not subject to collection. The Mishnah. Hamasi is bito stam, a man who marries off his daughter without mentioning anything about funds. Lo yivchois lo mechamishim zuz. He shall not provide less than 50 zuz. Posak lachnis aruma, a father who agreed for his daughter to get married, but said, "I'm not giving her anything." Aruma literally means naked. That I'm not providing any wardrobe for her, and she's going to. As things stand now, it'll appear that she's going to enter the marriage in rags. Well, lo yomer habal, the husband should not say, when she comes into my domain, which represents nisuin. When I consummate the marriage, then I'll provide her with a wardrobe. But rather, he must provide her, the husband must provide her with clothing while she's still in her father's domain. When we say her father's domain, we're talking about a case after Erusin. She is, technically speaking, she's considered married to this man. We're not talking about guys and gals that are dating each other. We're talking about a very formal legal status. She's considered married, but they haven't consummated their marriage with the second stage, i.e. the nisuin, yet nevertheless, it's the husband's obligation to see to it that she's clothed properly, even before the actual nisuin. V'chein hamasi es hayesoima. This is a reference to the people in charge of the community charity funds. So the Gabbai Tzedakah, the person in charge of the communal charity funds, is marrying off an orphan girl. Lo yivchois lo mechamishim zuz. He shall not provide for any less than 50 zuz. Im yesh bekis, if there's enough funds, mefarnesin oisah lechvi chavoda, then we give her according to her honor. In other words, we're not stuck to the 50 zuz figure, but a more generous allocation can be made if there are enough public funds. Omar Abaye, Chamishim Zuzi Pshiti. When the Mishnah made reference to the Chamishim Zuz, it means 50 Zuz, using the Medina standard as opposed to the Tsuri standard. This is a topic we discussed in our previous shiur, and it's mentioned here again. The Medina standard, you have coins that have the same name. For example, dinar Medina and dinar Tsuri. The dinar Medina is worth 1/8 of the dinar Tsuri. Or if the zuz Medina, if you have that, it's worth 1/8 of the zuz Tsuri. Well, how does Abaye know that the 50 zuz is a reference to that lower level coinage? Mimai? Midiktani, from the fact that the source said, Im yesh bekis mefarnesin oisah lefi chvod. If there's sufficient funds in the communal charity, we'll add. We're dealing with the marriage of a poor girl, so we'll add. Ve'amin on my kiss, and we ask, what does the word kiss mean? Omar rachbo arneki shel tzedakah. It's a reference to the container of charity. In other words, the public charity fund. If you're going to think that the figure of 50 zuz is a reference to an actual 50 zuz of the Tsuri standard, that's a vast amount of money that we're giving to the orphan girl in her marriage. Im yesh bekis, kamo yavina law. The Mishnah says if there are more funds, so we'll add. Well, how much more you can add to that? That's already a large amount. There's no need to add to that. So from the fact that the Mishnah says that if there's enough funds we'll add, it must be that the basic 50 zuz is really not that much. Elo shma mino chamishim zuzi pshiti. That the chamishim zuz figure in the Mishnah is a reference to the simple or the lower standard, the zuz medina. As we go on in the Gemara, a new marking appears on the side under our nosei mivneh heading. You see a crown shape. Sidra shel Mekoros be'inyan stock, a series of sources regarding charity. Hotzaos mikupa shel stock, different expenditures from the public charity funds. Tonu Rabbanon Yosom v'Yosom Shebo Lisparnes, an orphan boy, a male, an orphan female that come to Lisparnes. That means to receive food from the public funds. And let us assume for our discussion here that you have limitations. So, Mefarnesim es Yisayma, first we take care of the girls' needs. And afterwards, if there's any money left, we'll then tend to the boys' needs. It's the way of males to knock on doors, to seek out, to initiate on their own, to take the initiative of collecting funds. If you like the more mundane term, it's customary for them to go begging. The ein isha darka lachzor. It's not the way of women to do that. We have a pasuk kol kevoida bas melech pnima. The honor of women is their being their modesty, their non-public appearance, and hence to have a woman go knocking on door to door, that would be a violation of her modesty. Therefore, she's not expected to do that. He'll be able to take care of himself, is the feeling here. Yosai v'yasom, another situation. We continue at the top of Amud Beis. Shebo linose, they are coming to get married and they need funds in order to enter the marriage. And here they're turning to the public charities. So masinas yasom v'achar masinas hayosom. We first provide funds for the girls getting married and then for the fellow to get married. Because the embarrassment that a woman is subject to is greater than the embarrassment that a man is subject to. Now, as far as what the nature of that embarrassment is, here it's the Rashi doesn't comment on that. Is it whether it's a function of the embarrassment involved in collecting funds, or possibly the embarrassment of remaining unmarried? Whatever the case is, the embarrassment that would be suffered by the woman is greater than that of the man. So she has to be tended to first. Tonu Rabbanan, another source dealing with topics like this. Yosom Shebo Lisa, a fellow that is an orphan that is coming to get married. Sochrin lo, and here we have a list of things that we take care of. Sochrin lo bias, we rent a dwelling. Umatziin lo mita, v'chol klei tashmisho, and we prepare for him bedding and other house functional vessels. V'achar kach masiin lo ishan. Once the foundation has been laid out for a home, then, in other words, a rented home with house articles, then we marry a woman for him. Then we find a woman for him. Shenemar, the pasuk in the context of tzedakah, it says, "Dei machsoro asher yechsar lo," and we now break down the pasuk. Dei machsoro zeh habayis. That's a reference to providing him with a house. Asher yechsar zeh mita v'shulchan. The words, we didn't translate the words literally, but we're talking about a person who became poor. He's machsoro. He is now lacking for things. We have to provide for him. So the word machsoro, the root of the word is chaser, means lacking. We have to prepare enough to compensate for that which he's lacking, and we said that's a reference to a house. Asher yechsar zeh mita v'shulchan, a bed and a table. Loi, the word lo in that pasuk, zu isha v'cheinu omer ese loi ezer kenegdo. That's in the story of creation, where the Almighty says, I'm going to make for Adam an ezer, an associate, an assistant for him. That's a reference to the woman. So you see that the word lo is a reference to a wife. Tanu Rabbanan. Before we read this section, I think there's value in noting what the Rambam says in Hilchos Matnes Aniyim, which is found in the book of Zroim of the Rambam, for those who want to look at the original source. The Rambam in Hilchos Matnes Aniyim, Perek Zayin Halacha Gimel. So I want to read the Rambam to you. Lefi ma, I'm reading Halacha Gimel. Lefi ma shechoser oni ata mitzuva liteino. According to that which the oni, the poor man, is missing, you are commanded to allocate that for him. Im ein lo ksus mechasmo, so if he's lacking clothing, provide him with clothing. Im ein lo klei bayis koden lo, if he doesn't have house vessels, housewares, buy it for him. Im ein lo isha masino, so, and if he doesn't have a wife, we enable him to marry her, and you need funds for that. And if we're dealing with a poor woman, so the same thing applies. We provide these things for her in order to marry a man. Afilu hoyadarkel shel oni lirkoiv al hasus v'eved rotz lefonov v'he'erni v'yorad minachasav. Here we have a person that's impoverished. However, his former way was to have a horse, to ride on a horse. I'm assuming a horse is considered a more luxurious form of transportation than, let us say, a donkey. So he was used to a horse. And Eved Rotzlav, he was used to having slaves run in front of him, accompany him to wherever he's going. And now he's the Hani, the Yard Minuchosov, he's now become poor and lost his wealth. And now I have a man like this that was used to a high standard of living. We buy for him a horse, we provide for him a slave to run in front of him. Shenemar, the pasuk says, Dei machsoroi asher yechsar lo. That's the pasuk that we just saw quoted in the Gemara, indicating that there had been a loss. And the Rambam continues and finishes the halacha by saying, what we're obligated to do is to replace his loss, but not to enrich him, not to provide money that would put him above and beyond what he originally was. So with this Rambam, again, I highly encourage people to look things up in original texts. Rambam Hilchus Matnas Aniyim Perek Zayin Halacha Gimel. So now, with that in mind, you'll see how the Rambam did not make it up. He got it from the Gemara. However, the Gemara itself, as we read the Gemara, you're not going to see in a explicit fashion the idea of someone having been wealthy in the past and has lost that which he had. But let us continue in the Gemara, and with the Rambam's explanation, that is how we'll view the upcoming piece. Tanu Rabbanan, Dei Machsoro. That's the quote from the pasuk that we mentioned. Varam Perek Tezvav pasuk Ches. Ata mitzuva olav lefarneso v'ata mitzuva olav leoshro. You're commanded to support him, but you're not commanded to make him rich. Asher yechsar lo afilu sus lirkoiv olav ve'eved lo rutz lefonov. Even if, when we speak about Yechsar, this is what the Rambam said, he just added 2 or 3 words but made it much clearer. We're talking about someone that experienced a loss. He was a man of means at once, and now he doesn't have those things. Hence, afilu sus, if he was used to riding a sus lirkoiv olav, and an eved lo rutz lefonov, you have to provide the horse and the slave for him, so that he can feel that he's back to his original status. Omru alav al Hillel Azaken. It was said about the Hillel the elder, the great Hillel Tana of Tanaic fame. Shelokach leoni ben toivim echad. He once purchased for a poor man of high standing. And in this context, the term Oni Ben Tovim we can understand as someone that used to be a man of stature, but now was impoverished. And Hillel went and bought for him Sus Luka Vilov, Eved Loretz Lefonov, a horse to ride on and a slave to run in front of him. It was on one occasion where Hillel was in a situation like this, and he couldn't find a slave for the man. Lo motza eved lo rutz lefonov, v'rutz lefonov shloisha milin. And Hillel himself functioned as the slave, running in front of him for a distance of 3 mil. 3 mil is like 3 kilometers. Tonu Rabbanan, Maisa. But Anshe Golel Elyon, there was an incident in the upper Galilee, Shalok Chulani ben Toivim Echad Mitzipori, where they purchased for a poor man of stature, Litra Bosar Bechol Yom. Litra is a measure; it's a weight. What litra of the Gemara equals in today's terms, I cannot commit myself to say that, but it's let's just imagine, just for descriptive purposes, it's 1 or 2 pounds of meat. And they bought for him 1 or 2 pounds of meat for his daily food consumption. The Gemara asks, Litra Boser, my Rabusa, what's the big deal? Why do you have to feature a story of the Anshe Golo? They went out to buy for him a Litra Boser. That's a very standard procedure. That's the amount of meat that a person would consume on a daily basis. So the Gemara, my Rabusa, what's the big deal? We'll see very shortly what the big deal is. Omar Rav Huna, Litra Boser Michel Oifois. It's that Litra Boser, but not of we'll call meat, rather of fowl, of birds. Certainly, this is subject to different times, different societies, and what have you. But as far as the Gemara is concerned, the oifos were a very expensive type of item. So that if we're talking today's terms, there's some very expensive cuts of meat. They bought him 2 pounds of this very expensive meat on a daily basis. Well, okay, that's interesting. And with the backdrop of what we saw with the Rambam and our explanation of the Gemara, this is a man that had been used to eating that every day. So that's what they were doing over there. Viboya Sema. Another approach is Bilitra Bosar Mamish. Here the reading is tricky. I would read it with a slight pause after the word Bilitra. Bilitra means a litra of coins to buy regular meat. But the regular meat there was very, very expensive. So they had to use, that is like 2 pounds of coins, which is a lot of money, to buy the regular meat. Because the regular meat was very expensive. So it was and that explanation you can see in the Rashi at the very top line at the end. The litra boser she'aboser bioker. The meat was very expensive there. Vayitzorach boser b'dmei litra mos, and he needed an amount of meat, whatever amount. That the amount of the actual meat is not recorded here, but he needed a litra of coins to buy his requisite daily ration of meat. Rav Ashi Omar. Rav Ashi's pshat is that we're talking about standard meat. The weight of the meat was a litra, and you're asking, well, what's the big deal in that story in the Anshe Golil? Here's the story. Rav Ashi Omar Hasam Kfar Kotenhoya. It was a small village, so there weren't many people there, and B'chol Yoima have a mafsadi chiyusa am tulasei, and every day they slaughtered an entire cow for this guy, for this Oni Ben Tovim that lived there. Let's just assume that, the obvious point, Kfar Kot means that after slaughtering out, there weren't going to be people to buy the balance of the meat. And let's add to this, there weren't freezers or ways of preserving the meat. So by the next day, the meat would go bad, and they have to slaughter another animal. So every day they were slaughtering an entire animal with whatever was left over going to waste. But that was all because we had to provide for this Oni Ben Tovim. We now have a new marking on the side under the Mivneh heading. We have a triangle feature. We have a series of stories, and note that these Stucca related stories go down to the bottom of all the way down to the bottom of the Omid of Gemara. Hahu, there was an Oni, a poor man that was seeking support, seeking food. Hahu de Asla Kame de Rabbi Nechemia. Omar Leib B'me'atosoi, Rabbi Nechemia asks him, what do you eat? Omar Leib, the Oni said, B'boser shomein v'yayin yoshan. Oh, I eat rich meat and aged wine. Sounds like he eats on a nice high level. So Rabbi Nechemia was taken aback. What you expect us to provide that with you for you? Maybe consider living with me, meaning following my way of eating lentils, something very, very cheap. Well, this Oni heard that. It sounds like he had no choice. So he tried it out, and he died Omar oy loy loze shahoragoi Nehemiah. Woe unto this guy that died through Rabbi Nehemiah. Adarabba, to the contrary, oy lo Nehemiah shaharagoi loze miboyale. If you're going to say anything, it's woe unto Rabbi Nehemiah that caused this man to die. Elo ihu who, but rather this poor man. Elo ihu delo iboyale lefnuke nafshe kulehai. Just to go over this last line again, after this guy died, the initial reaction was oy loy lozeh shahargu Nehemiah. Woe unto this guy that was murdered by Nehemiah, giving the impression that Rabbi Nehemiah was to blame. So the Gemara says, Adarabba, you should say to the contrary, oy lo Nehemiah, woe unto Nehemiah that someone died under his hand. Shahargu lozeh miboyale. And why? What's the problem? That Eloihu, this poor man, shouldn't have put himself into that position. He shouldn't have lived a life of such excess that with the change to the Adoshim, he would feel such a deprivation and end up dying from that. So the burden really is not on Rabbi Nehemiah to view him as a murderer, but rather that's unfortunate for Rabbi Nehemiah that he encountered a person like this that didn't know how to lead a reasonable lifestyle, and as a result of that, he was mefunok. He was excessively pampered, and therefore he caused his own death. Hahu dosel kamei de Rava. Omar lo b'mata soid. Similar story of a man coming to Rava and Rava asking him, "What do you eat?" Omar lo b'tarnegulis ptuma v'yayin yoshan. I eat fattened birds and aged wine. Omar le, Rava asks this guy, "V'lo chaishis l'decha d'tzibura." Do you not concern yourself with the fact that you have a very expensive lifestyle, and that's what you're requesting from the public funds? You're putting pressure on the public funds. Omar le, the Oni says, "Otu mididhu ko achilno, midarachmono ko achilno." That which I eat, it's not a function of the public's decision, the public's will. What I eat is based on what the Kodesh Baruch Hu has given, and what I'm accustomed to is that which I have a right to. The Tanina, the Pasuk says, "Einei kol elecho yisaberu v'ato noisein lohem es ochlom beito." Beitom lo nemar. It doesn't say beitom, a reference to the public in general. That the Almighty is described in this pasuk as one who gives their food beito, their food in the single form of speech. Beitom would mean in the plural form of speech. So beitom lo nemar ela beito, that you, the Almighty, provide the food to each individual. Melame, this teaches us shekol echad ve'echad noisein hakodesh baruch hu parnososo beito. Rashi explains on the third line from the top, beito hakol lefi mashu tzorich kol yochid v'yochid lefi limudo. The Almighty provides each one with what he is accustomed to. The Rashi is invaluable because in the strict translation of the Gemara, I don't think that it's so apparent. But Beito means lefi limudo, according to what you are accustomed to. And therefore, what I am asking for is something that the Almighty Himself approves of. Adohachi, in the meantime, asoi achte de Rava de lo chaziole tleisar shani. While Rava is dealing with this poor man, Rava's sister, that he hasn't seen for 13 years, shows up. Not only does she show up after such a long break. But v'asyole tarnagulis petuma v'yayin yoshan. She's bringing with her, probably bringing to her brother Rava, this rich bird, fattened bird, and aged wine. Wow, Omar, Rava says this is what people like to call an unusual coincidence. My dekamo, what's this and what's going on over here? Omar lay. So Rava continues, noticing what we call the hashkocha, the divine intervention. And Rava continues and turns to the poor man and says, Ne'nesi loch. Literally, I humble myself in front of you. Rashi says, I spoke too much. Kum echol, get up and eat. Here you have what you desired. Here it is. She brought this meal and enjoy. As we go on in the Gemara, we see a double underline used on the side of the Gemara. We have a nosei mivneh heading. There's a highlighting of the expression mishi yeshlo or misha einlo. We're going to deal with people that come to the public for support. Some people are people that actually have means, and yet they want public funds. The other people that don't have means and don't want support, and everything in between. So let's see the source. Tanu Rabbanon, ein lo v'eino roitze lisparnes. Imagine a person that doesn't have his own funds. He's a poor man. He doesn't have his own funds, and he doesn't want to take from the public. For him, it's an indignity. So, noisim lo l'shum havo. How do we help him? What do we do with him? We give him money as a loan. V'choizrin v'noistin lo l'shum matona. Divrei Rebbe Meir. And then later on we say, keep it. It's a gift. V'chachomim omrim noistin lo l'shum matona. V'choizrin v'noistin lo l'shum halva. We give him the money initially as a gift, and then we give it to him as a loan. Now that doesn't make any sense. L'shum matana halo shokil. This person doesn't want to take from the public funds, so giving it to him as a gift, he won't take it. Omar Rava, what the Chachomim meant is liftoyach loy l'shum matana. That means initially suggest him take this as a gift. When you see that he doesn't want to do it, so then you say, okay, take it as a loan. The reason we have brackets here, we explain on the side, is because this you have is a Gemara interruption of the Tanaic source. So the entire source we have in a frame with the Gemara sectioned off with these brackets. As you have that here, and on the next line you'll see that again. Now we have another kind of person. Yesh lo v'eino roitze lisparnes. A man that has means. Apparently he's a miser, and he has means, v'yesh lo, and he doesn't want to support himself from his own funds. Rather, he wants the public to support him. And Rashi adds that this guy is such a miser that he's willing to starve himself unless the public would feed him. So a guy like that, noisnim loy l'shum matana, you give it to him as a gift, v'chayzrin v'nifroi mimenu, and then we seek out payback later on. So the Gemara says, chayzrin v'nifroi mimenu, if you're going to seek payback later on, sulok shokil is not going to take any more. He doesn't want to pay from his own pocket anything. He's a tremendous miser. Omar Papa li'achar misa, when the source said later we collect from him, means after he dies. While he's alive, so we'll pay from the public funds, knowing full well that this man has enough money to replenish the public funds that were diminished on his behalf. But that collection will be after his death. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Now Rabbi Shimon is referring to this second case, in this case of Yesh Lo V'eino Roitz Parnes. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Yesh Lo V'eino Roitz Parnes, a guy like that, ain't his cooking. We don't deal with him at all. He's a miser. Let him, die in his miserliness. We don't deal with him. The first case, Ein Lo V'eino Roitz Parnes, person that doesn't have means, but it's beneath his dignity to take charity. Omrim Lo, we tell him, Havei Mashkon, bring some collateral for us. Vitul. And once you bring collateral, so then in his mind, what they're offering to him is a loan, because he'll want to get the collateral back. And so they say to him, you'll see that it's all lip service in a moment. Give us a mashkon, Vitul, and take from the public funds. Now, Rashi adds, there's much more to the story than just the translation here. Rashi adds that when this poor man hears them asking for mashkon, he's a poor man, he doesn't have anything to give them as collateral. But he figures, since they were asking for a mashkon, for collateral, what they're giving to me really is a loan. And to take a loan, that's not a compromising of one's dignity. He'll take the money, and later on, of course, they're not going to collect from him. And this idea of telling him, Havei Mashkon, Kadesha Tazuach Daito Alav, in order to raise his otherwise drooping spirit. Tana Rabbanan. Here we have a quote from, again, a pasuk in Dvarim, Perek Tezvav. And the pasuk says, Ha'avet. Rashi on the Torah, Rashi commentary on the Torah says that this word ha'avet is a reference to someone that doesn't want to receive a gift of charity, so give it to him as a loan. And the Targum, the Unklus Aramaic commentary on the Chumash says that the word ha'avet is v'ozafa. Ozafa is a loan. So now, the pasuk says ha'avet tavitenu. A double expression is found in the pasuk. Havet zeh she'ein lo v'eino rotzel isparnes. The Torah is addressing that kind of person that doesn't have any means and he doesn't want to take public funds. She'noisim lo l'shum havo. We give it to him as a loan. V'choizrin v'noisim lo l'shum matana. And then later we don't collect. We give it to him as a gift. Tavitenu. That is also in the pasuk. There's a double expression. Is it havet tavitenu? What does the second word mean? This is a reference to someone that has the means, that doesn't want to pay from his own funds but wants to draw from the public. We give it to him as a gift. This is in fact what we had explained earlier, that Rav Papa explained, but you see that Rav Papa has a Tanaic basis for that explanation, that there will be a collection from this guy, but after he dies. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. V'chachomim oimrim, yesh lo v'eino rotzel lisparnes, a person like that, ein nizkokin lo. We don't deal with him at all. And this we saw in the previous source in the name of Rabbi Shimon. So what's the double expression? According to this, the pasuk isn't making any reference, and we don't deal with him at all. Dibra Torah Keloshin B'nei Adam. The Torah at times speaks in common terms like people speak, sometimes for emphasis purposes, but not that the extra expression is a reflection on a new point of law. So that's the expression, Dibra Torah Koloshem B'nei Adam. The double expression is the way people speak, and the Torah itself at times does that. And another story. Mar Ukva Havi Anya B'Shivuvusei. Mar Ukva had a poor man in his Shivusei, in his neighborhood. Davirogil Kol Yoima. Mar Ukva was regular every day. Deshadi Le Arba Zuzi B'Tzinura Dedasha. He would place in a surreptitious fashion 4 zuz in the Tzinura Dedasha. The doors of that the Gemara is describing are doors that swung on a hinge. The hinge was a hole was in the ceiling and an opposite hole in the floor, and there were pins, pegs coming out of the door into which into these holes the pegs were inserted, creating a door hinge. So Tzinura Dedasha is the hole in the floor that we just referred to. So Mar Ukva every day would put 4 zuz in that part of the doorway. Yuma Chad, one day, Omar, the poor man, got curious. We said before Mar Ukva's behavior was surreptitious, that the poor man didn't know who was putting the money there. But one day, the poor man says, Ezel echsi man ka'ovid bi ahu tivusa. I want to see who is doing me this favor. Hahu yuma, that day that the poor man got this idea, Nogale Lamar Ukfa Lebei Midrash. Mar Ukfa was delayed in the Torah study center in the base Medrash. Asyo Devisu Badei. So it seems that the Mar Ukfa's wife was seeking him out, so she went to the base Medrash. She found him there, and she accompanied him home. So she's now accompanied him. We said before that Mar Ukfa every day, probably on his way home, would stop off by this Oni's place and deposit the money. So now we have Mar Ukfa with his wife. Kevan de Chazyuha de Komatzli Le Ledosha Nofak Basrayu. As soon as the poor man saw the door swinging a little bit, tilting a little bit, he went out after them. Rohut Mikamei, and they ran away from him. They didn't want to have any we'll say eye contact. They didn't want to be seen. In other words, they didn't want the Oni to see them. Aili lahu atuna. They went into in their attempt to escape from him, they ran into a furnace. To have a grufa nura. It was hot, but there wasn't an actual fire burning there. The grufa means the fire was scraped out. But the floor of this furnace was very hot. Havaka miklin kari de Mar Ukfa. Mar Ukfa's feet were burning. Omroleit Vis, his wife who was with him, said, Shkol karech oisiva karai. Take your feet and put them on my feet. So her feet weren't burning. She had, she had super protection, which Mar Ukfa, her husband, a great leader of the Jewish people, he didn't have that merit. Cholash daite, he had a feeling of discouragement. What's going on here? How is it that my wife is experiencing this, we'll call divine protection from the fiery floor, and I'm not? Omra lei. So she explained to him, Ano shchichno begavi de beisa umikriva ahanyosi. Before we translate, what she's saying is that I have a greater merit than you in the realm of charity, and in the merit of charity, so I am afforded this divine protection. We even have a concept, sugya tatzil mimoves, that charity saves one from death. Now, what is her added merit in the realm of sugya that he doesn't have? She says, and here we'll translate, Ano means I am shachichna bagava de beis. I'm commonly found inside my house. What does that mean for a woman to be in the house? She's near the fridge, she's near the food, she's near the bread box. Mikriva anos, when a poor man comes, mikriva means near or quick. Anosi, the benefit that I provide the poor man is immediate. Poor man, he doesn't have what to eat. So when he comes to me, I give him immediate satisfaction. As opposed to when he comes to you, you're in the base medrash, you're studying Torah, which is a great mitzvah, the greatest mitzvah we have. But nevertheless, with regard to charity, you can't do that. You're in the base medrash. You give him cash. He doesn't have immediate satisfaction. He has to use the cash to buy the food. Therefore, she explains, you don't have to feel a sense of discouragement. The protection that I get is a function of the higher merit of charity giving that I have by virtue of my reality. Umay kulehai. What's this whole running into the oven, not to be seen? They didn't want to be seen by the poor man. Ad kidei kach, so much so that they were willing to run into a hot oven, into a hot furnace. What is the reason for that? The Omer Marzutra Bar Tuvia Omar Rav. Marzutra, and some say V'amri, another version of names. We have several versions of names here. Omer Rav Huna Bar Bizna, Omer Rav Shimon Chasida, V'amri la Omer Rav Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. So we have several different versions of names. Who teaches the following? Noyach loy le'adam shimsor atzmoi l'soich kibshano eish. It's more pleasant, more beneficial to a person to allow himself to be put into a furnace, the al yalbin penei chaver baravim, and not subject his fellow man to public embarrassment. So what were they figuring? They were figuring that if the poor man saw who was giving him the gift, that would lead to a feeling of embarrassment. They wanted to spare him of this public embarrassment, and hence, in accordance with this teaching, they ran into the Kivshon Ha'esh. The Gemara asks Minolan, where does this idea come from? Mi Tamar, it comes from the story of Tamar. Dichtiv, the pasuk says, he mutzeis. Now, in the context of our Gemara marking shiur, it would take too much time for us to get into the entire background, the story involving Yehuda and his daughter-in-law Tamar. But for the details of the story, we recommend looking up the psukim in Breishis Perek Lamed Ches for the entire story. But in that particular story, Tamar was in a position she could have saved her life in that story by exposing the behavior of her father-in-law Yehuda. But she remained silent. And in the course of that story, it says, he mutzeis. According to Rashi, it means she was taken away to be burnt because of the seeming act of immorality that had taken place and was deemed to be subject to a death penalty. So she was being taken out, and if not for the fact that Yehuda spoke up and said, she is not guilty, but I am the guilty party, that saved her. But she wasn't going to say anything. She was rather going to be taken out to be burnt. And the Tosfos says that he mutzeis, Rabbeinu Hananel has a girsa, the word mutzeis spelled without an aleph. Instead of being taken out, the word mutzeis meaning to be incinerated. The Tosfos quotes at the end of the Tosfos commentary. But it's the same idea, that she was willing to be subject to execution by fire rather than cause Yehuda embarrassment. Mar Ukva, another Mar Ukva story. Hava Anya b'Shavusei, Dava Rogil l'Shturi le Arba Mea Zuzi Kol Male Yom Gipuri. There was a poor man in Mar Zutra's neighborhood to whom he was accustomed to sending 400 zuz every Erev Yom Kippur. Yom Achad Shadrinu Nihale Biad Brei. One year he sent the money with his son. Osa, Omar Lei, Lo Tzarach. The son came back and said, that guy doesn't need any money. And on the side we have a bow tie shape under the Mivneh heading, Lo Tzarach. The Shnei Maisim, Im Totzaot Shonot. There are two stories with different outcomes. She Bohem, Nir Im, Mekabli Tztoka, Lefias Nagusam, Kilu Einam Tzrichim Tztoka. In these two incidents, there will appear people that are receiving tzedakah as people who really don't need it. So the son says, this guy doesn't need it. You're sending money to someone who doesn't need it. Omar my chazis. So Marikva says, what did you see there? The son answers, Chazoy de kamazalfa leyayin yoshan. I saw that in his house they were sprinkling aged wine, which is an expensive beverage. They were sprinkling it on the floor to keep the dirt floors from the dust rising, so they would water it down. And they didn't use water over there; they used aged wine for that same purpose. Omar, so Mar Ukva, upon hearing this, said, "Mefanik kule hai." When he's so pampered, he's so delicate that he needs the wine, that he needs whatever the fragrance that the fine wine provides, and water wouldn't have been sufficient for him. Whoa! Aifinu, double the amount. V'shadrinu ni'alei, and send it unto him. Ki konicho nafshe, when Mar Ukva was about to die, Omar aisu li chushbenoi ditztoka, bring me my charity records. The records that I keep track of how much I give out to charity. Ashkach dehavik kosev bei shivas alfi dinri siyanki. He saw that there was written in his records that he had distributed 7,000 dinri siyanki. There's a commentary on the bottom of the Gemara page that says matbeat tov. Rashi says it's the name of a place, but 7,000 dinar siyanki coins. either they're fine coins or it's the name of a place. Omar Mar Ukva, realizing he's on his deathbed, he says, Zavdoi klili v'urcha rechikta. Literally, Zavdoi klili means light or little. I've prepared little food for my long trip. That's, of course, a figure of speech. When a person passes from this world to the next, there's a journey. He's on a journey. What does he take with him? What does a person when he dies take with him? Obviously, takes mitzvahs. He doesn't have anything. The cash that he made in this life, he can't take. The luxury limousines that he bought in his life, he can't take with him. He can't take with him his friends or his relatives either. He doesn't take anything. He takes his own collection of merits. He then decided at that point that half of my estate I am dedicating to charity. So that making that decision while he's still alive, he will then gain the merit of all the charity that he's now donating. The Gemara asks, how can a person give so much money to charity? But there's a teaching that we saw earlier in this Masechta, Be'usha Hiskinu. It was established, it was enacted in the town of Usha, where the Sanhedrin had once been located. There was a rabbinic enactment. The one who spends money for charity purposes shall not spend more than 1/5. And here he's giving out 1/2 of his property. The Gemara answers, that's true, but Hani Mili Mechayim, the idea of limiting how much one would give to charity is while the person is still living, alive, and well, and we don't want a person to spend so much on charity, more than 20%. Shemo Yered Minachasav, a person might himself lose his income, lose his property, and if he doesn't have a savings, if he's given it all away for charity, what will he himself have? Avoliachar Misa, but when a person is about to die, after death, less lambo, we're not concerned. That consideration doesn't play a role. There's an interesting topic here about giving so much away. Half of his estate he gave away. This story involves Mar Ukva, and we just saw Mar Ukva had a son that he sent. He has children, assuming that his children survived him, which is a reasonable thing to assume. That's what from this story you see that. Isn't that something to consider? So there's a topic here called the idea of leaving for your children. There are interesting sources on that topic, and we've noted on the side Gittin Daf Mem Zayin Amad Aleph, and there's a Gemara in Eruvin that the Marsha there makes reference to. The Marsha and Gittin makes reference to. There's also a Gemara in the first parak of Bava Basra, Daf Yud Aleph Amad Aleph, with Munbaz HaMelech and how he dealt with matters of charity and how much to keep for himself and for his descendants. An interesting topic. We continue in the Gemara. Rabbi Abba Havetzayer Zuzi Besudre V'Shadi Le Lachore. Rabbi Abba, in giving charity, he used to wrap it up in his sudre. Sudre is a turban. It's a piece of cloth that was often used as a head covering. But he wrapped up the cash in this cloth and slung it over his back. Umamtsi nafshi lebei anyi, and he would walk with the money slung over his back to a home or to an area where impoverished people were to be found. And what would happen is they would come up from behind, untie the pouch, take the money, and he wouldn't see them so that they wouldn't feel embarrassed. However, umatzli eine miramoy, he would scan the area, look to the sides to make sure that there were no fakers, no tricksters that would come and untie as if they were themselves aniyim.